Is there anything you would have done differently?
We reported a true story.
Our colleague Brian Williams is back in Kuwait City tonight after a close call in the skies over Iraq.
Controversial Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh and questions about Kavanaugh's drinking in the past.
Sean Hannity, come on up, Sean Hannity.
Today, Andrew Cuomo is having a moment.
Hi, I am Chris Steyerwald.
And I'm Eliana Johnson.
That's true. Welcome to Ink-Stained Wretches, where we break down what's going wrong and what's going right with the American news media. Eliana Johnson, I wonder if we could have an episode where we indulged our mutual obsession with food journalism, and dining. Could it be done?
We have the perfect person.
Who would it be? Who would you get? What kind of journalist would you get for a task like that, though? That seems it seems impossible.
I only had to look down the hall at Washington Free Beacon. So thank you so much to our friend Vic Matus for joining us today, who has a long and storied history with culinary journalism. And we thought it would be great to have Vic sort of walk us through the history of foodie journalism in America and talk a little bit about what it is like today. Welcome, Vic.
Well, thank you, Eliana, and hello, Chris. It's an honor to be on your show. Thank you for having me.
So first, I should say that the best recommendation that I can offer to our listeners is that you are the most impossibly charming, most of a universe of ink-stained wretches, right? Where people pride themselves on kind of being rotten and a little sour. You are a balm. You are a tonic, sir. And so I'm so pleased that you are with us, my friend, because I enjoy your stuff. But would you please rehearse the trajectory of the storied career to which Eliana referenced? How did you get into journalism? Why do you write about food and drink so much? Tell the tale.
Thank you, Chris. The first thing I want to point out is I might seem like a very outgoing, gregarious, and nice guy, like what you see is what you get. But at home, I'm a miserable curmudgeon. I mean,
okay, you got to balance it out. Yeah,
that's
you
right.
That's right.
I take it out on my family, but everybody else benefits from that. I sort of fell backwards into journalism. I went down the road to Georgetown University School of Foreign Service. Now, I'm originally from the Jersey Shore. But I wanted to become a Foreign Service officer. The problem is it doesn't really happen when you fail the Foreign Service exam, which I didn't really prepare for. I didn't know at the time, they don't really tell you like you're going to have like a Princeton review for Foreign Service exams, and they should. And I just walked, the night before I was at the Tombs, and you just walk into this thing.
You got to know like every flag.
I thought I did. And I did.
Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, all these there's a lot of different kinds of questions. There's a psychological element to it as well. And you gotta write,
we know you tanked on that one.
Right. I'm not going to get into the profile and the writing demarches and whatever, but that did not work out, even though I'm really good at geography. But what I did was I interned at a speech writing shop called the White House Writers Group, which is run by Clark Judge. And that's where I met John Podhoretz. And so that explains. So I did some work for him as a research intern. And then I wrote him a letter when I learned that they were starting the Weekly Standard. And I just said, please remember me if something opens up. And sure enough, it was just my luck. A girl who was working there as staff assistant decided to make a very bold transition into joining the Steve Forbes for President campaign.
Get out of town.
And that opened up the door for me. And I became John's personal assistant, staff assistant, fact checker, and then eventually an assistant editor, and worked my way up the ladder. And I was there for 20 years. And then Matt Continetti hired me and brought me over to the Free Beacon in 2017. And now I have the pleasure to serve under Eliana Johnson, our editor-in-chief. My whole life, Chris, it's like being a Renaissance artist, and I depend on patrons. So currently, Eliana is my patron. And I serve at their behest.
It's one of the most absurd things I've ever
You're going to be painting Ignudi in the corner of her office ceiling.
Whatever it takes.
Laying on a high scaffold on your back.
That's right.
I see it now.
But I've always been interested in food. It's funny, I never was able to express myself creatively in college because I didn't write for the paper. I didn't write for the Hoya. So all of a sudden, this opportunity happened. I immersed myself in the writing and editing process and learned how magazines were put together, layout, production, you name it. And so I said, well, this is great. I can now finally combine my interests and turn it into journalism. And the first thing I ever published was a column, a casual column on the new F word. And that was fried. And it was when Kentucky Fried Chicken became KFC.
Oh, yes.
And here's the funny, and my mother, God bless her, she framed it's a first article. She's so excited. It's in my basement. And that's the only way I remember this. But the one thing I said at the end of that column was one day, and I was joking at the time, that we would be vindicated.
Totally.
And that red meat and butter would actually be good to eat. And suddenly here we are.
Well, before because I want to dive into that, because that is right on the money in terms of the trendiness of food journalism and the food conversation. But I have to ask, the Steve Forbes presidential campaign, I never knew this about you. Do you know, can you offer anything about the Saturday Night Live appearance of Steve Forbes, a particular cultural political obsession of mine?
The funny thing is during the monologue, he kept on referencing the actor Victor Mature. Do you remember this?
I do. Part of my obsession, yes.
Okay, so there was that aspect. And then the only thing else I remember was him being a construction worker, working with like a pile driver or something. And I thought that was very funny.
The funniest one, of course, was at the time. Now we're really dating. We're really going to date ourselves. At the time, there was this sensation around the book Primary Colors, which was a lightly fictionalized account of Bill Clinton's rise to power. And the question was, who had written it? And Eliana, was that Joe Klein? Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so Steve Forbes did a whole skit in which he was the fictional author of a similar piece that described the Lothario-like conquests and insatiable carnal appetites of a character named Steve Forbes. And I watch that skit probably once a year. It comes up in my algorithm and I watch it.
That's great.
Okay. So in the 1990s, fat was the enemy. People were scarfing Snackwell's cookies. And the whole idea was you don't want there's fat in it. You don't want the fat in you. Don't eat fat. Everybody dropped fried. Everybody dropped whatever. And now people are basically drinking avocado oil in the raw. You knew at the time that there was something wrong with what people were doing. Talk a little bit about the faddishness of food culture and food journalism.
Well, it's like the old joke about, the woman, this is from a Three's Company episode where the woman goes up to the restaurant and she says, do you have a diet special? Yes. Okay, I'll have 2 of them. There is a very famous singer. I'm not going to mention who it was. And she was staying at the Kennedy Center, and I knew somebody who worked at the Watergate. She was, performing at the Kennedy Center, staying at the Watergate. A friend of mine, he worked there at the time, and he said that she ordered multiple of these. She had a very strict diet, and it was like 2 giant trays going to her room. So we say, and it's funny because that casual column I wrote, I mentioned the Snackwells because it's absolutely tasteless, and you're just feeding yourself this thing. And so when I made that joke, I thought maybe not, it'll work out, but I really hope it does. And I sort of preceded the Atkins diet. And that was the beginning, if you remember. It was suddenly, it was protein is good, the carbs are bad, and pasta took a big hit as a result.
And so what will be next? If 30 years ago you were a seer, what will we give up meat and fat? And I mean, we've been under a sort of sustained effort and we'll talk more about the political pressures around food, but we've been under sort of a sustained pressure to move to plant-based, to move to those things, but it doesn't seem like the flywheel ever catches. Is that ever going to be the thing?
No, likewise, that's my great fear. Those are the 3 scariest words for me: plant-based diet.
Mm-hmm.
And every time they say plant, I'm thinking like a fern. I'm like, is that where we're going to be resorting to, eating plants? And I get it. And you know what? And salad is good, but as my friend and the great food writer Michael Ruhlman says, if all you ate was salad, you would poison yourself.
Yeah.
You just cannot. You need a balanced diet, and it's common sense. And my hope is that common sense comes back a little bit of this, a little bit of that. They're going to be changing again the food pyramid. They're always tinkering with it, and now they're talking more about the alcohol consumption part of the food.
Yeah, they're coming
the
for you.
pyramid.
Yeah, I'm
That's
very
scary.
stressed out about this,
They're
Vic.
coming
And,
for you.
we're both stressing.
Yes, it is.
Vic, I was hoping to get you to talk a little bit about the trajectory of food journalism, maybe starting with Anthony Bourdain and
Right.
his impact on writing about food. And yeah, talk a little bit about him and his importance.
Well, I mean, it's Anthony Bourdain was so unique. When he died, I wrote a quick obituary, in fact, for the Washington Free Beacon, and my observation was Bourdain was a born writer who became a chef. And some chefs then do want to dabble in writing. I have but you'll see this, for example, I have, for some reason, a Jose Andres book at home, and it's with Richard Wolff. And we know what's going on over there. Richard Wolff, I'm sure, did a lot of the heavy lifting. Bourdain, before he wrote Kitchen Confidential, he wrote a mystery, like a murder novel called Bone in the Throat. And it was, again, it's food-based, but, it's much along the lines as you were talking about earlier before the show, Chris, with Nero Wolfe, for example. And it's just heavy elements of food into a story. Bourdain's gift was he could tell a good story. And whenever I talk about what makes food writing good is good writing.
Mm-hmm.
And then it becomes very versatile. You could write about you could write about science if you want, or some engineering thing. If it's good, it's good. And that was Bourdain's gift. But he happened to decide to go to the Culinary Institute of America. And then he ended up working at Leibling, which was a great restaurant at the time. We used to have one here in Washington, D.C., and that was all the rage in the Penn Quarter. And then at some point in time, he decided to write about his experience about inside the kitchen and what it is like. And everybody has jumped on that now. Do you remember Waiter Rant? Behind the scenes, and that's a front of the house book about what it's like to be a waiter and terrible customers. But Bourdain was really the first to show us, the peek behind the curtain. There have been great food writers going back, in my opinion, the golden age of the New Yorkers, writers in the 1930s, 40s, and 50s. But Bourdain really changed that because he started off, as most books can do, which is you start off with a little essay and then you build out from there. And of course, his appeared in the New Yorker. And that was his warning. He had a lot of warnings about, I think the title of the piece was Don't Eat This Before Reading. Or Don't Eat Before Reading. And he talked about all these different things to look out for. And one of them was don't eat sushi on Monday. And it was because he had the inside scoop about when do the food deliveries and the fish deliveries arrive, and that you wouldn't get them on the weekend. And what you're getting on Monday is probably something that arrived Thursday, maybe Friday. So it's 3-day-old fish. It becomes questionable. In later years, he said he regretted that because, of course, it's okay to have sushi on Monday now. Deliveries come in now, on the weekends and on Mondays. But at the time, it was a big deal. If you ever go, anytime you go to a restaurant, it sticks with you. I'm sure you go to a restaurant and the waiter says, oh, we have our special of the day. And it's like, look out for what they want to get. Seafood pasta.
Oh, you know it.
Oh,
hide
the soup
it in
of
a
the day is
sauce.
salmon chowder.
Yeah, he writes in this essay, the fish specialty is reasonably priced and the place got 2 stars in the Times. Why not go for it? If you like 4-day-old fish, be my guest. Here's how things usually work. The chef orders his seafood for the weekend on Thursday night. It arrives on Friday morning. He's hoping to sell the bulk of it on Friday and Saturday nights when he knows that the restaurant will be busy and he'd like to run out of the last few orders by Sunday evening. Many fish purveyors don't deliver on Saturday, so the chances are that the Monday night tuna you want has been kicking around in the kitchen since Friday morning under God knows what conditions.
Yes. He talked about that, and it's one of the things that also makes me, to this day, I still get reluctant in certain places to order eggs Benedict because, he says that it's, the hollandaise sauce is to be carefully tended. And, you can go to a diner and get it, but you don't know how long that, a bacteria frat has been going on, as they say. So there are things that will stick with you. Great food writers will write things and say things that will just resonate with you. And I can go back for a lot of different food writers and who I've read and still remember things that they said that stick with me. But Bourdain, he was great. And he was also a pleasure to interview. I had the pleasure of interviewing him when I wrote a celebrity chef story for the Weekly Standard. And he, you know, I mean, and I was a nobody, and he must have spent at least an hour on the phone with me on the record. I said, "Do you mind if I tape this?" "No, go right ahead." And we were off to the races. And we even, you know, I asked him about Wolfgang Puck caving in to animal rights activists and that he would no longer sell foie gras, which is the goose liver, right? Because of the supposed poor treatment of the goose and the duck. And Bourdain, he compared Wolfgang Puck to, he said, he's no better than the German who rats out the Jewish family next door. And I couldn't believe he said that. And it was on the record. And I wrote about it and he didn't care. He just was, you know, whatever he said, you know, he was fine with it. And that's what made him such a breath of fresh air. And now, for the record, I mean, I've interviewed Wolfgang Puck. He's a very nice guy. So I really felt bad about that. But, you know, it's all part of it.
One of the piece that launched it all was written 25 years ago. And 25 years ago, most American cities had medium-sized and smaller American cities had one good restaurant or two good restaurants. It was probably French, maybe Italian, and that was about it. One of the things that we've seen in the intervening quarter century is that every place has fine dining and multiple options. And I think Bourdain, or do you agree that Bourdain was a singular kind of person? I am still moved today when I think about one of the last episodes of a show he did when he went to West Virginia and got it right. Very few people come from New York to West Virginia to do journalism and get it right. And he got it right. And it was really good. But the market for talking about high-end food and cuisine exploded right at the time that he landed, right?
Yeah, that's right. And he was not a snob.
No.
You talk about the West Virginia episode. I remember an episode where he visited Jollibee in the Philippines, which is the Philippines version of McDonald's fast food. And they have weird food.
Can
there.
you
I
please
say
explain
this.
that?
I'm-
Can you please
I'm
explain?
Filipino
I
myself.
have tried to eat at Jollibee. There's a lot going on there, Vic. There's a lot
Yes.
happening there. Please explain.
It's a weird phenomenon. They like to mix things up. So it's not like we're strictly going to have burgers and fries. It might start off this way, but then at the end you start throwing in fried chicken, and the next thing you got spaghetti basically with ketchup, or they use banana ketchup. They like the sweet, and you're not supposed to do these things, yet they do, and it draws people in. It's quite a phenomenon. There's one in Virginia, and I think the opening day, the line was, around the block. People, had to go check out the Jolly.
It kind of reminds me of the Greek diner phenomenon of, what do you have on the menu? We have everything, right? Do you want beef?
Right.
Do you want beef bourguignon? Do you want a Western omelet? Do you want chicken wings? 24 hours a day? Yes, it's available. So there is that sort of madcap approach to it. And by the way, though, Filipino cuisine now, restaurants in Washington, around the country, has become a very high-end experience, and people are digging on Filipino cuisine, which is nice.
Yes, it's funny. I feel I'm conflicted here because on the one hand, all right, it's about time. We've been eating these things for a long time. Every now and then you'd see a cooking show with a Filipino chef in the competition, like on Top Chef, Dale Talde or whoever. And they're like, I want to open it. My dream is to open up a Filipino restaurant. Why aren't there more of them? And suddenly it's become hip and trendy. That's great. Our people have finally arrived. At the same time, I'm not spending $30 on something that I can make at home. I'm almost offended by that, but it's novel right now to everybody else. And most of Filipino cuisine, people ask me what that is. And in the best possible way, it's like a fusion of Spanish and Chinese.
I was going to say, Filipino cuisine was long ago doing, and I think Hawaiian cuisine does some of this with different flavors and different whatever.
Yeah.
But a lot of what is happening now in cuisine is to take Latin food and combine it with Asian food, which happens naturally in Mexico and in Chile and in other countries with significant Asian populations. But the Filipino cuisine was there 100 years ago, already doing it and tilted toward an American palate.
Yeah, that's correct. And it's all part of that Spanish legacy, by the way, because you can go to Latin America, you can go to South America, you can get an adobo, a pork adobo, you can get lechon, which is the roast pig. You can get that in Puerto Rico. You can get that in the Philippines. It's all part of the great Spanish legacy. The other part of the Spanish legacy is, men can have women on the side. That one is a little bit more questionable. But it's part of the tradition. They used to say, what did they used to say about the Philippines? It was, 400 years in a convent, 40 years in a whorehouse. And that used to be the comparison of the Spanish versus the American experience. But I'm going off on a tangent here. We can bring it back.
Okay, you included in your list of worthies, I was so pleased to see one of my favorite things ever written about food. And Joseph Mitchell, the New Yorker in its heyday, when it had a knack for hiring Southerners, basically, who were great writers, outsiders to come and write about New York. A.J. Leibling exception. But there was this thing, and Joseph Mitchell was the greatest of all of them. Joseph Mitchell is, if I could write half as well as Joseph Mitchell, I would consider my vocational life a total success. And he wrote a famous piece, All You Can Hold for $5. Why do you love this piece?
Well, as you mentioned, he's sort of an outsider, Chris, right? I mean, he came in, he's observing these things from a distance. This is really a great gift for, a talented journalist, is be able to look at these things. He doesn't, like a lot of these early writers, he does not make himself he's not the center of the story, right? I mean, even if you read, to jump forward, people like, Gay Talese and all his various profiles, you rarely hear him say, I think this, I was here and he said this to me. It's always about these other people. And this is what he did, Joe Mitchell did. And this is 1939. I find it interesting because in my mind, this is still sort of end of the Depression. It's right before World War II happened for the United States. And yet it was the scene of sheer decadence happening in New York City. And what these were, for your listeners, is these were beefsteak parties, and they would throw political parties, and other, local politicians would do this. They'd throw a beefsteak party, Democrats and Republicans in different parts of the city, and you invite all these people in. As you can see it's for $5, and it was very primal, right? Because it was not a formal sit-down restaurant. There was no silverware at these places. They gave you an apron. There were cans of beer. And trays and trays of steak and other meats would come your way, and you would eat them with your bare hands. And then, use your apron as your napkin. And that's it. I mean, they really got down to business. And there are certain things in that piece that still stick with me. Like he writes about one place where they used the only steak sauce. They hated the fact that some of the women would ask for ketchup. Right? Which is a funny thing because we talk about that today with certain people who will have a well-done steak with ketchup.
Monstrous.
Certain politicians.
Monstrous.
Yes, for politicians who do that.
It reminds me, there's a famous burger place in New Haven, Connecticut, where you are not allowed to ask for ketchup with your burger. It's plastered all over the wall.
I bet. And in fact, I think that's one of those places, Eliana, that claims to be where the burger was invented, I think.
Yes.
I don't know if that's Louis' Lunch Bucket or if it's
Louis' Lunch.
Okay, yeah. And
Yeah.
I think the argument against them, by the way, was that they invented the patty melt, not the burger. But that's a different argument.
Yes.
It's
Not asking for ketchup, that's ridiculous.
Right. They always say the customer's right, and this is what they do, even in these beefsteak dinners. Fine, we'll give you that. But what one of these places did was, it was a combination of au jus and like hot sauce, Tabasco, and butter mixed together.
Ooh.
And you would dip your... Yeah, I know. It was so good.
That sounds right.
I actually shared that with Tom Colicchio, but I have yet to see it on his menu.
That sounds
But
really good.
It sounds very good. Yeah.
Okay.
And that's why I loved it. But he was, again, he and Leibling, and Joe Wechsberg, they were all great writers.
And they're totally great. All right. Next on your list, Between Meals, An Appetite for Paris. Why do you love this book?
Leibling's amazing, and he puts me to shame because I think to myself, if I can just, be good in one category, I would be so happy just writing about food. And Leibling was amazing about food. And he, go out or order Between Meals, which is a compilation of his various New Yorker essays in one book. It's a quick read. It's just absolutely wonderful. His descriptions, he's funny. But what amazed me about Leibling is this was just one aspect of the writer. Of course, he wrote about boxing, The Sweet Science. He wrote about Earl Long, the Earl of Louisiana. He was there at D-Day.
A book that I cannot, for political junkies, recommend enough. the book, The Earl of Louisiana. It's a masterpiece.
Right. And Leibling was so great with descriptions, and he's self-deprecating oftentimes. And I mean, and he's vicious. He's, from the beginning of Between Meals, when he talks about being a little kid and the governess being this really mean German, you're off to the races. And he talks about his friend Yves Mirand, right? And this is like 1920s Paris. And this man ate a lot. And it's one of these, you can't believe people ate this much. And we talk about people and gluttony today, but it's been going on since obviously Roman times. But so that's one aspect. But the other thing that I always got a kick out of was Leibling returning to a restaurant that he so loved, but he hadn't realized that management had changed. And one thing that he noticed was, they used to be open for lunches, but now they're just open for dinners. And then he looks at the menu, and it finally went from French to Italian. And he says, that's the warning sign. Once you see a restaurant go from French to Italian, that's it. You got to leave. And that's actually true with a lot of places, and then, places that are just badly located. But, again, he's such a wonderful writer talking about his experiences. And sadly, I think it was the eating that got him at the end.
I forget who said it of Leibling, but it was that he had been a guest at their home, and they found that he had used bacon as a bookmark in one of the books. And
That's too good to be true.
This aligns perfectly with everything about that. Okay, dining at the Pavillon, which I confess I have never read. Tell me.
You would love this. It's actually surprisingly hard to find. It's not like there's a new edition that has been done. Our friend Robert Messenger turned me on to Joseph Wechsberg, so he was one of the lesser known but great writers of the New Yorker and other places at the time. And he wrote this book, Dining at the Pavillon, as they called it. And that was a restaurant that was in the late 1940s, early 50s, the most famous restaurant in New York City. It was very hard to get into. It was a fancy restaurant. Before the Pavillon, there were places like Delmonico's, but that was really a place. And they were French chefs. And this was very exciting. And the reason why they called it the Pavillon was because these were chefs who were stranded in New York after the World's Fair in 39 and after war broke out and the invasion, I think it was in 39 or 40. And they were at the French Pavilion of the World's Fair. And so then they just set up shop in New York City on 55th and 5th. So it's right around the corner from the St. Regis Hotel. And that became the place to go. And the owner of the place was a very famous French guy named Henri Soleil. And Joseph Wechsberg just wrote about that. And then he followed 3 other chefs in the process. But it's very funny because there are a lot of sociological observations from that particular book and his essays. And one of them was, it used to be the place to be at the Pavillon was the inner dining, right? You want to go there through the curtains, past the bar. And this is where you want to be with all the famous and beautiful people. After a while, they wanted to expand business because they're always about the bottom line. And they said, we need to add a couple of small tables at the bar. And he finally relented. He said, fine, you have some tables. I don't know who would do this, but you have little tables at the bar. Suddenly, those became the hardest tables to get were at the bar. And the reason was it's right in front by the windows. So anyone walking on Fifth Avenue who wasn't allowed in, they didn't have a reservation, but they wanted to see who's going to the Pavillon. They would look through the window, and the first people they'd see were sitting at the bar. And those are people who want to be seen. And that's to this day. I'm sure people, I know people, they love being seen at restaurants. In Georgetown, for example, they got to have the window seat, So it's very funny. He also scoffed at the idea that you're at a bar, you're having a cocktail, and then your table's ready. And then the idea of bringing your whiskey to the bar was like, it was sacrilege because it ruined the whole look of the table by having your cocktail there. But, things have changed, obviously, since then.
This has been written about, but I guess democratization, but the technological change, and we're going to talk about this when we talk about Ruth Reichel's.
Oh, yeah.
But so now you have, it's sort of like a sincerity score in Xi's China, because you make your reservations online, right? And there's a secret code among the restaurants in Washington and New York and in other big cities where how valuable of a diner you are is known to the crew before you arrive. And I have had the experience of being with someone who had a higher score or a lower score than mine, where you change the name on the reservation and the circumstances are different. You get this kind of table one time, you get that. So it's all still there. They've found a technological way to do it.
Yeah, 11 Madison Park. I went there once, and I don't know about you. Eliana, I thought it was so over the top, and
I agree. It's there's a fine line between just good food and there's like a showmanship. It's too much.
it
Like
was.
I go and eat delicious food.
Yes, I don't need the story about, and it's too clever by half where you're doing the steak tartare, but you're actually using carrot instead.
Oh,
You see
dear.
how we fooled you here, and you
Right,
get to
yeah.
grind it table
Oh,
side.
that was another fad. Was like who was the guy who did it? Like Wiley Dufresne.
Oh, Wiley Dufresne,
Remember
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. That sort of a gastro.
Brain. Yeah.
Yeah,
exactly.
exactly. That was ridiculous. But 11 Madison Park, supposedly, they would Google the customers who would, the reservations to see if you're anybody important. And I just remember we went with good friends of ours. I deferred on the wine to my friend. He picked a very expensive wine. And as a result, I didn't know how much it cost either until we were whisked away to the kitchen to watch a demonstration. They made us a special cocktail.
It was a good bottle.
And it was a very good bottle, and it was a white. Just think about that. It wasn't even a red. We go back, and then they asked us if we wanted perhaps a small glass of a very expensive red wine. The name it's escaping me now, but it was like a Petrus. It was a very high-end bottle. And I thought to myself, wait a minute. Why would they offer us this? Because it would be $200 or something a glass. And then it occurred to me, oh, we must have gotten something very nice. And the service is nice, but it was so long. And I'm not there I'm really there to catch up with friends and enjoy good food and not so much for the show.
Do you favor returning to places and having a rapport and relationship with a restaurant, or are you omnivorous? Do you like to change and go different
if you've
places?
ever been to the Palm with Vic, I think you know the
I
answer.
I share
we
your
haven't.
love.
We're going to have to. We're going to have to fix that, Chris, because this is one of my pieces of advice for kids starting out in Washington, regardless of the job. I say, if you're going to be here for a long time, pick a place. I don't care what the place is. It could be the Daily Grill, which is sadly closed now. It doesn't have to be extremely high end. Or it could be somewhere, that you like, that the food is just fine. But the most important thing is the service. So, I mean, it's like Daniel Boulou says, the three most important things in the business is consistency, consistency, consistency. I like to go to a place. I go to the Palm, Joe's Seafood, and the Bombay Club, right? Those are
The Bombay
those are
Club
my
is
three
an
go-tos.
underappreciated.
Yes.
We did a New Year's Eve there one time, and it was absolutely splendid. And you think of it as Clinton era, very 90s kind of whatever,
right.
but they're still killing it. And I co-sign with the Palm. Love it. And it's great. And the food is good.
Yeah.
And the service is wonderful. And they know your name. And it's really, really good. So you and I are going to have to do that.
Yes, because there's nothing. I got together with some friends recently. We went to some, prime seafood place out in Tyson's. And the first thing they ask is, your whole party here? No, it's not. Okay, well, when 5 of the 6 show up, let us know. We'll get you at your table. We're going to order a lot anyway. Why can't I be seated now? And that's what I don't want to deal with. And that's why I enjoy places like the Palm. Can be one person out of a party of 6. I'm sitting there. They know what I want. Last minute, we can add one, drop one. They're fine with it. Some places, can't do it.
Joseph Mitchell, AJ Leibling, and the Palm, you and me, Vic. We are brothers from another mother. Talk about Ruth Reichel. What's the and truly gifted, but tell us who she was.
Yes. So Ruth Reichel was most famously, she's had other jobs in her life, including in the restaurant business, but most famously, she was the restaurant critic for the New York Times. And every critic's going to do things differently. My food writing mentor, Phyllis Richmond, she never believed, for example, in a star system, right? People like the star system because I think you get more clicks that way. Ruth Reichel decided that she was going to review restaurants incognito. And most famously, she did this in a 1993 piece where she on a restaurant review of Le Cirque, and she went multiple times, initially without people knowing who she was, and took careful notes about the service, where she had to wait, how she had to wait, while their table was ready, how they asked her at the, from the moment you walk in, do you have a reservation, almost in an accusing manner, to suddenly being whisked away. And then just all these complimentary almost bouches and you name it, the red carpet, soup to nuts. And it's funny. And we can relate to that. I think we've been in this position. I've been in this position at other restaurants. It's great. She gets a little carried away. I've read several of her books, and I think it was her book, Garlic and Sapphires. I think when she gets right into the restaurant reviewing experience, she really got into the incognito thing where she's talking about the wigs. She could have multiple wigs, and then half the time she's just talking about her alter ego, and it gets a little crazy. You don't have to go that far. I think the food is going to be the food at this point. Social media, I think, has changed a lot of it, where everybody suddenly is a food critic, depending on how many followers you have on Instagram. I will say this as a quick anecdote. So on the one hand, I think it is, getting too crazy if you're going in disguise at a restaurant. On the other hand, years ago, in the early 2000s, I happened to be in Prague visiting our friend Jeff Gedman when he was at Radio Free Europe. I'm talking to some journalists out there, and they said, the food writing scene in the Czech Republic was still new. And a guy was telling me about a food critic who would go to restaurants incognito. They wouldn't know who he was. He'd order the food, he'd get the restaurant meal, and then he'd say, okay, this is the food, and it's totally fine. And then he said after the meal, he would go to the manager and then say, actually, I'm so-and-so with this newspaper, and I'm writing about it. And if you want to give me a free meal, it's fine.
Comp me, baby. Comp me.
You can't do that.
So you mentioned Phyllis Richmond, who was the food critic, restaurant critic for the Post for decades and was a fixture. The Post now has Tom Sietsema, who I think is very good. And he seldom has led me astray. How do you handicap Sietsema?
He's fine too. He does the star system, and he's a veteran at the Post now. It's very interesting. The New York Times, they shift people in and out of that spot. You don't have to be, a lifelong gourmand to take it. I mean, remember Frank Bruni was like the Rome correspondent, and then he becomes the restaurant critic, and then he becomes a features editor or something like that. It's just another stop along the way. And I appreciate other places where, the restaurant critic has a very lengthy, a very in-depth knowledge of the restaurant business. I think he does fine. It's not the same. For example, I can't compare it to, for example, guys who write about, you ever read car sections, and now suddenly they're obsessed with almost every review is about an electric vehicle. Yep. And I'm like, no, let's go back to, let's go back to gas powered cars. Same thing with restaurants. Give me the good stuff. Give me the standards. Not for me though. Everybody's different. I'll look at a restaurant review, and if I see the restaurant's located in Maryland, I'm skipping it.
Right.
I'm sorry. No offense to Maryland. I'm not going up there. But if it's somewhere in Virginia, DC, maybe.
Beyond Chevy Chase might as well be in the Arctic Circle. It's just not going to happen.
That said, I will say, it's funny. I once said to Phyllis, I said, you're so lucky to have a job like yours, to do all these things, go to all these restaurants. And she said to me, you have no idea how many awful meals I've had in my life. And so, and that included Filipino restaurants at the time, which were mostly karaoke bars, so things have changed.
One of the differences now, obviously, is that a lot of restaurant criticism, a lot of food writing and journalism is Instagram. And a lot of it is that because Instagram loves food and it's good content. Those, and you can't really call them reviews, right? People go to the new place, they post their video, and it always feels like it's shady to me, right? It always feels like that this influencer has gone to this place. It looks good. They're going to places that look good, but I have very little confidence in the actual review of the food because it feels shady, right?
Yeah, that's right. And sometimes, you get presented a meal. It's so beautiful. You can't help but want to take a picture of it. But you feel kind of dirty doing it in a weird way because, I mean, I was with my sister at Le Bourdain, which is Eric Repair's great, temple of
Famous,
food.
yes.
And she's like, oh, this is so good. I got to take a picture. I'm like, oh my gosh, make it quick, but people are, the reason why it feels shady is because a lot of these people are putting it up at that moment. And then suddenly you might get service. The waiter comes by, a complimentary meal. Here you go.
Tag the
Take
restaurant,
this,
right?
take-
They're doing
Right,
what
tag
the
the
guy in
restaurant.
Prague could do,
Right.
but they get to do
It's a
it
bit much.
remotely. They can tag the restaurant
Right.
in the post, and if they've got
Right.
enough followers, they're going to get a bottle of champagne sent over to their table.
That's right. And I have gotten mmany free meals in my life, but I've never reviewed restaurants and I would never do that. So if I'm actually reviewing it, I would not accept the free meal. They would not know that I'm there. You put it in somebody else's name. They order a bunch of food. You show up and then it's too late. They can't take it back. You can taste everything that way. But if I'm interviewing a chef about a different subject and they happen to say, hey, while we're, the late Michel Richard, I spent a couple days profiling him for Washingtonian magazine.
Oh, yeah.
I even had to drive him around. But, we're talking whole days and we're there and it's 10 or 11 a.m. We're just sitting there in the kitchen. And then, he breaks out a bottle of Montrachet. I'm not
You're
going to
not
say
going
no.
to say no. You're not going to say no. You are forgiven. You are forgiven. Okay, I want to move us through some current celebrity food folks, and I'm fascinated to know what you think of Kenji Lopez Alt, who went from outsider kind of bloggery kind of guy to being the mainstay of New York Times cooking and this total fixture. Give us the Vic take on Kenji Lopez Alt.
I don't have much of a take, to be honest. I mean, who do I like reading? So I'll read some of his stuff. It's fine. I think we shared an article on slicing onions.
Yes.
I think that's
Highly technical.
Yes. So if you're, and that effect, look, it turns out that I was almost correct about how I'm slicing an onion because it's similar to Jacques Pepin's. And there's a way to do it where you can make it into a cube and it's called brunoising. I do that sometimes. Otherwise, there's a few handy, tips here and there. Not my thing. I have to tell you who I really like as a food writer. So I don't read a lot of his stuff.
Wait, Vic.
Yes.
I must say, I own the Kenji Lopez Alt, one of
Okay.
the cookbooks. This approach stresses me out. The idea
Right,
that there's a scientific
Yeah.
approach, way to reach perfection.
Yeah.
And there are others in this vein, right? You have
Right.
And it's stressful. Like, I don't want to
Okay.
feel such stress for an amateur cook. I get it if you're Anthony Bourdain or,
Right.
Michel Richard.
Well, I would say there are certain elements in the cooking world. There's always an element of obsessive compulsion, right?
the anal retentive chef. Speaking of Saturday
Yeah,
Night
oh, yeah.
Live, yes.
Phil Hartman's
Yes.
the great anal retentive chef. There are levels, right? Everybody's on the spectrum, but some more than others. So it strikes me that Kenji's really more on the more extreme side, but it appeals to certain people. For example, if you prefer baking than cooking, then you want everything to be very precise in terms of temperature and time and how to do things and all the different measurements. Cooks are very different than that. We sort of like to improvise while it's happening and the flames are going and different things are sizzling and burning. That's the way I sort of operate on this level. Thomas Keller, for
Yeah.
example, visited him, got a tour of Per Se in New
Oh,
York.
really?
Yes. And because I had interviewed him for a different piece, and then he just appeared and said, hey, you want to take a look in the back? So I said, sure. He has, a fake table in the kitchen where it's the setting for the customer, for the diner. And everything is measured with rulers in terms of the distance between the forks and the knives and the glass. I mean, it's so very precise. There was a little shelf with little measurement spoons, and they were all precisely distance from each other. And I asked him if it was true that, when they clean these pots, especially for things like the veal stocks, that they bother with the outside of the pot and the bottom. I mean, I almost never clean it. I don't spend a lot of time cleaning the bottom of pots, and that's why it has, it's all the burn marks on it. And he said, yes, it's true. I also clean the inside of the pot, he says. So he does a little bit of both. What I appreciate of Thomas Keller is he says, if he's standing outside his restaurant and he sees a cigarette butt on the floor, he's not going to wait for the busboy to pay. He'll do it himself. And I tell this to kids all the time here at the office. No job is too big or too small. But anyway, back to your thing. It can be stressful regarding the precision, but it appeals to certain people.
So I put in that category as ahead of Alt. Before he arrived, you had Christopher Kimball.
Oh, yeah.
And how many briquettes for when I smoke meat, I do follow the Cooks Illustrated, or I guess now Milk Street
yeah.
method, which is 40 briquettes to start and add 8 briquettes an hour to maintain about 300 degrees and use that as my baseline. And the sort of gastronomy science for home cooks thing that came in, and I guess part of it is now you can buy everything. 20 years ago, you couldn't buy anything, right? You want saffron, good luck. But now I was cooking and shopping, and I got a text from Jessica asking if I could pick up sumac and tahini. And I thought, I live in an age of miracles and wonders, because 20 years ago, even in DC, the idea that you could go to a grocery store and you wouldn't have to wonder, you'd know that you could buy sumac to make chicken shawarma because they're going to have it. So I think I think this is a technological story too. The stuff that Alton Brown's talking about, or Kenji Lopez Ald, or Christopher Kimball, just wouldn't have been possible for most people. You know, in the Julia Child era, she was saying, you're going to go to the grocery store, you're going to have like 5 vegetables that you can buy. You can buy a chicken. There's like 2 cuts of meat that you can buy. Do the best you can, and here's how you can closely approximate. But now it's a hobby for so many people.
Yeah, that's right. I remember when the first time I met Jacques Pepin, and he was at the French Culinary Institute, and he said when he first arrived in New York City, you know, you could not find things, and he would mention Cherville, Swiss chard. You know, you go down to the local, he called it the D'Agostino's, which is, I think it's still around. And it was a very limited, you get iceberg lettuce, you know, that's what you will get. So things definitely have changed. You mentioned Chris Kimball, another great guy. And I actually wrote a piece about Cooks Illustrated. I went up to Boston, to Brookline, I went down to watch the taping of America's Test Kitchen. And he's a very nice fella, very proper though. I mean, even off camera, what you see is what you get. And Bridget Lancaster, by the way, she's wonderful. I want to give her a shout out. But Christopher Kimball, it's funny. He went to Columbia University. He graduated, you know, he was there in like the early 70s. He said during the terrible time. Little did he know. But anyway, he was like an anthropology major, and he was going to get a job working at the Natural History Museum. And he just said that the world of academia, he just said it was vicious, that particular world. And I mean, he's right about that. And then, but he was he was interested in business and business plans. And that idea, by the way, of Cooks Illustrated, and the reason why it worked and why Milk Street probably works now is you can go, you know, everywhere on the internet to find a recipe, but you can only go to one place, supposedly his place, where we have tested, you know, 12 times and perfected this particular way to grill a chicken. And the way, or bake a chicken, the way Cooks Illustrated works, the magazine is, they get reader input. What is it that you're interested in?
And they don't take
cooking?
ads.
They don't take ads. They have no ads. They have a lot of subscribers. It is an amazing business model, and it's very hard to replicate. They have a lot of subscribers. I can't emphasize that enough. And the reason is we're giving readers what they want. And the funny thing is, what they want are 1 million recipes for baking a chicken and salmon. That's it. There's no other fish. They're not interested in other fishes. And so what happened was Chris Kimball then left to do Milk Street. And now it's, as you mentioned, Chris, sumac. You know what the other one is? Za'atar.
Oh,
See that one everywhere. Eliana, yes. Harissa, za'atar.
we are in our Middle East
Kind
phase.
of the key. Sumac and za'atar are like key to getting the kind of restaurant Middle Eastern flavors
Right.
when you're doing it at home. And it's like a real shortcut. It's so easy.
Yeah. That, and gochujang, by the way, gochujang, which is, I
that
think, is
too.
Korean. And it's these things, but as you mentioned, impossible to find in the olden days. Now it's everywhere.
The Latin phase seems to have not ended, but ebbed. The Middle Eastern and Korean phases seem to be very much
now,
very, very much upon us. And I am reminded again, everybody eats the same stuff. Every culture has some version of most of the same things. Fried chicken is
Yes.
my favorite example. You know what culture loves fried chicken? Every culture loves fried chicken. Everybody has it
Who doesn't love
because
fried
it's
chicken?
delicious. That's why. But the cultural, the sort of like the zodiac progression of this is hot and everybody's doing this right now, and now this is hot and everybody's doing it right now.
Right.
So am I right? Middle Eastern and Korean seem to be very hot right
Yeah.
now.
That's right. Yeah, absolutely. Everybody wants to cook that way and, attain those flavors. Somewhere Indian cuisine was in that mix as well, but I think we've almost passed it now, strangely enough.
Indian to me, and I don't know, maybe you have a different experience. Indian seems to me fussy and hard to cook compared to
It's too many ingredients.
Is that right?
Yes.
Too many ingredients,
Too
Eliana?
many, and they're like rare, and it's the same with kind of Chinese
Yeah,
food.
real Chinese,
That
yeah.
if you're trying to do it at home, like it's just you can't find this stuff. You got to go to the special grocery store, and it's
but
hard.
You got to go to the H Mart.
You can take
Exactly.
whatever you're cooking and add cumin to it, and people will know that you meant it to be Mexican. And you can take whatever you're cooking, and you can
No, Mexican, you need cilantro.
never cilantro.
I love cilantro.
You're the devil.
Well, Chris, this is a very interesting thing because, I'm sure you know this. It's
Yeah.
just a matter that there's a percentage of the population who, to them, cilantro tastes like soap.
Yes,
Yeah.
gasoline.
And that's, you're one of them.
I'm a low threshold. I'm not hard avoidant, but I am a low threshold cilantro person. When it tips over into one molecule too many, it tastes like gasoline and it obliterates all the other flavors.
So like Vietnamese is probably not your thing either.
Vietnamese can be very, and I know that there's a difference between coriander and cilantro, and it depends on which kind you've got. And I do like Vietnamese food, and it is great living in Washington because the pho situation is good and excellent. And one of the many things that makes the Washington area great is that you can have every food, every cuisine in the world, and you can eat it in a strip mall and find these excellent restaurants. That's why, by the way, I love Tyler Cowen, the economist from George Mason, who writes food reviews of ethnic restaurants, and they're excellent.
Yeah, he's great. Yeah.
Okay, now a more controversial topic.
Oh, boy.
Guy Fieri. No one generates as much
I'm a huge fan.
angst.
Sorry.
No one generates as much angst as Guy Fieri, mayor of Flavortown.
This is a man of the people, okay?
All right.
I'm a huge
All
fan.
right, Vic, where are you on the Guy Fieri?
Okay. Early Guy Fieri. You have to pronounce the R like it's a D. Is that what's
you got to
happening
do
here?
it. You got to do it.
Guy Fieri.
Guy Fieri, yeah.
Yeah, 1.0. Guy Fieri 1.0. Too much, over the top. What has he done? Okay, he won the cooking competition, but it's just, I can't take it anymore.
He
What
goes
is
to
he eating?
Flavortown.
Right, he goes to
okay?
Flavortown and donkey sauce. What's happening there? The
Yeah.
donkey sauce. That scares me. But then suddenly, I'll tell you what the turning point was. It was I think it was Pete Wells in the New York Times. It was the vicious review of Flavortown in
really good.
Times Square. And
I went there after that review.
Yes, and I think a number of people did, and I said, good, good for them, because I think it was unnecessarily cruel. And then all of a sudden, I said, let's take a second look at Guy Fieri. And he does these shows on the Food Network, the grocery one where it's a competition in the
Guys,
aisles.
grocery games.
Yeah, no, okay, not for me. However, the diners,
drive-ins,
diners.
I love that show.
I think that's an excellent show.
It's awesome.
I find it very comforting, and you can always tell, and he's always polite because he's never going to say, this is terrible, I'm leaving. But you can always tell when something is just mediocre, because he'll take a taste, and then he'll say, well-balanced flavors, that's good. And then that's really what he'll say. Whereas if he says, shut the front door, that's it. You got to go there. So I've come around on Guy.
I think that
I think a lot of people
the famous attack, which was in 2012 from Pete Wells, and I think part of it was the backlash against it was like, we know what it is. People, it's
Right.
like, don't complain about the Olive Garden. We know what the Olive Garden is. We're aware that they have a oil tanker of Alfredo sauce back in every Monday and pump the tanks back full of, but it's affordable.
Yeah.
It's satisfying. people like it and people go. So when it becomes sneering, at, and, one of the things that's weird about Washington, I took my son, we went to the movies, and I took my son to a Longhorn Steakhouse. Now, the Longhorn Steakhouse, which is or was part of the Darden restaurant group and a popular chain around the country, my son had never been to a Longhorn Steakhouse. My sons find going to the Outback Steakhouse a wonderful treat, a wonderful delight, because you don't find those places here. They're just not. You have to go into the exurbs,
Go to the burbs
to get those places. And you know what? They're good. They're basically good. They provide value. They provide reliable food. And for most of the country, that's a good thing to have.
That's exactly it for most of Americans. So I always get a kick out of some of these food pieces, where they're talking about really exotic things and going to high-end places. It's great if you can live healthily like this, but most people don't have these options, and going to Balducci's or Whole Foods all the time is not always a great deal, although Whole Foods has gotten better. You talk about, B. Wilson wrote about the problem with sliced bread, the bread you get in the supermarket, because it lasts forever. Even, way past the expiration date. It's still in it's still in our kitchen. And I'm like, wow, this thing expired a month ago and it still looks good. And that's a bad thing for different reasons, for all the things they pump into the bread. That said, and she says this, it's like $2.39 or whatever for a loaf of bread. You go to your baker, you get, the sourdough loaf, or, the 6 grain, ancient boulet or whatever it is. Not everybody can do that. Great for you if you can, but not everybody. And the same thing with the Olive Garden and the Longhorn or the Outback Steakhouse. Now, my question really quickly, do you get the bloomin' onion?
So I do not eat the carbs.
Oh, right.
I do not eat the carbs.
Wait a minute, there's carbs in that? I didn't know there were carbs.
I do not eat the carbs, but when we do, on the occasions that there's an Outback Steakhouse on Route 1 in Alexandria.
Yes.
And the bloomin' onion is always ordered, and it delights and excites the boys. They love to see it. But then I noticed this. They pick at it. They have a couple of petals, and then I think, well, there's $19 that I will never get back.
Yeah.
But it is always ordered because that, and the free bread, the 2 little loaves of brown bread with the sweetened butter.
It's warm.
Yes, it's warm.
Yes.
They find this all amazing. When my sons go to fast casual big chain restaurants, it's like taking a Soviet to an American grocery store in the 1970s.
Right.
They just can't believe, look at all of this stuff and all of the things that we can do. And they're having fun, and there's boomerangs on the wall. Must be good.
Yes.
Well, that's me at Cheesecake Factory.
Yes.
Oh, you love the Cheesecake Factory?
I love the Cheesecake Factory.
And you like that skinny menu, Eliana.
I
don't do that.
The menu's good, but they have some amazing appetizers. Their Tex-Mex egg rolls
are
amazing. They have these like corn griddle things that are awesome. Their cheesecake is really delicious. Their salads are great. I mean, I love that.
And there is
place.
now a Cheesecake Factory 2 blocks from the White House.
Well, I don't like that one, actually. You got to be in the burbs.
That used to be a great restaurant before that, but you're right. You got
That
to be.
was Ruth Chris, right?
Yeah, no, that was that other
Woodward
kitchen,
yes. And it
Woodward
was good.
Yes.
That was Woodward. But it's funny. You mentioned the Cheesecake Factory, and so this was years ago when I was hanging out with Michel Richard, and I bring it up, and I thought he was ready to hate on it and make jokes about how ridiculous it is, dump and stir restaurants, right? Because everything is done. They just heat up the food, and there's too many things. And he said, that's a place where if you feel like getting Korean or Chinese or meatloaf or a hamburger or a salad or breakfast, you could all go with your friends and you could all get different things. That's a great place, he says. How wonderful is a place like that? So you know what? Good for him. And
It's really good. And like when you eat the vegetables, they're actually fresh. It's not like a gross salad. Really good.
Okay.
Really, I'm a
starve.
Okay, this one's a twofer. I want you, so recently, Jose Andre, who has a famous restaurant here in Washington, has Washington connections, won a James Beard Award, has recently won a James Beard Award for the World Central Kitchen Cookbook. So the two-prong question. One is, Jose Andre, what's up? And number 2 is, the politicization of
Yes.
culinary journalism and culinary writing that it's I think Jose Andres restaurants are good and Jaleo is still good and I'm all for it. I like ham. I'm into
It's
it.
really good. I like the Middle Eastern one.
Zaytinya.
Zaytinya, that's fabulous. Speaking of the Middle Eastern trend, that place has
Yeah.
been around forever, but it's really
I have
good.
not read the World Central Kitchen cookbook, but I am willing to wager that it was not the best cookbook of any cookbook of the million cookbooks that came out. But I am willing to bet that the James Beard Foundation gave that award to them because of Andres' politics. What do you say?
Yeah, I would say that there's a good chance that that was the reason why it won. No offense, I haven't read it either. But you know, I mean, there's a lot of great cookbooks out there, and of course, it was in the news. We all know what happened, so you know they had to go with that. And he is now, as some people, they rightfully call him Saint Jose Andres, right? Because he's out to save the world, and I get it, and it's great. And he goes out and he feeds a lot of people. He's got a lot of opinions. I met him once. He's a nice guy. I loved when he was an up-and-coming, struggling, hard-fighting chef to keep open a place like Jaleo, which at the time, if you remember, on 14th Street was not a safe place. This is before the, you know, the you call it the MCI Arena at the time, but before the basketball arena opened up, and you had streetwalkers outside Jaleo. You were scared where you parked your car, but the food was really good, and it was one place, and he was actually in the kitchen. You will never, good luck finding him in any kitchen now. He pulled off the great trick, which is he found people to delegate and to continue his vision without being there. But he knows most customers, they always think any good restaurant you go, that he's in the back there somewhere doing it, you know? But so, I mean, I do think now he's just a bit over the top. So I'm less of a fan.
So this sets us up very well for our facile file for our gluttony episode. And the facile file is where we talk about stories that people wrote that were willfully ignorant and work that is willfully ignorant. And our first entry is a not surprisingly, Washington Post piece. To David Chang, the ethnic food aisle is racist. Others say it's convenient. And David Chang, also Washington ties, became an absolute sensation. He had a Netflix show. He had all this stuff. And he had Momofuku, which had a Washington outpost for a while. And now he's selling ramen by mail. First, is the ethnic food aisle racist?
Right. Okay. Well, no. Okay. And I want to go backwards really quickly to talk about David Chang. It's funny that he's doing this now. I think every chef secretly unless you are Andre Soltner at Lutece and you're the monk in the one restaurant all your life and you dedicate your life to one restaurant, I think they all secretly want to be Wolfgang Puck. They want to have a place in the airport at Reagan, you know? And so I think, I mean, this is where David Chang is now. Congratulations to him. It's great. Is the food aisle racist? No, I think I have bigger things to worry about than that. I'm kind of amused sometimes. It's like, why? Where am I? You know how hard it is sometimes to find sesame? And you're like, where would they keep sesame in what aisle? But this isn't even places like H Mart, which is an Asian supermarket. And I'm like, it has its own dedicated aisle. I will say this. I go up to New Jersey. You know, I visit my dad up there and the local ShopRite. This is New Jersey. They have a separate aisle called Polish foods. Now, that's really racist. And I go in there and I'm so offended every time I have to go there to get my latkes or whatever it is. And there's another one for Italian, you know, because there's that many people in the population. That's where they go to get their, you know, chivardel or whatever it is. So no, I don't think so. It's international cuisine. It's great. You know, I've shopped in places in Europe when I lived there, you know, for a year in Vienna, and it's very different. And it's just a different experience. So, you know, there are bigger things to worry about than this, but this is what they do. And I think they knew a lot of readers are into that.
So the Vic's answer is don't sweat it. Okay, here is an even more facile slice of the cake. How food media fails BIPOC. This is from Grub Street. A 2019 diversity baseline study found that 76% of all publishing industry professionals, from interns to the executive level, are white. In my own experience as a biracial Indian writer, I've never had more than one coworker of color on my team, and frequently it's just been me. Within food publishing, where budgets continue to plummet, those mostly white workers tend to turn to creatives they've employed in the past, most of whom are also white. Quote, there are publications I'd love to work with, but I am frequently told we're not looking to try new photographers, says food photographer and stylist Jenny Huang. My field is dominated by white male photographers, and when higher ups at a publication are in charge of a budget, they often want to stick to people they know. How do I even fight against this? Come on.
I don't know where to begin with this, because usually what you try to do if you're a good place is you hire people who are good. And that's the first thing you think about, regardless of their, I don't know, ethnic background or their skin color. But it's just this, it's the obsession with identitarianism that has led people to believe that, food writing, the last bastion of racism or something like that. I mean, this is insane. So I bet a lot of these people that they have employed are old because they've been there for a long time. And that's why they're there, and that's the way the business is. And when they leave, great, there's going to be an opening. But I don't think they're going to judge, how you take a picture based on your ethnicity. I don't see how that's going to impact the way you're taking pictures of food. And this is what we're talking about over here. Or food, find a different perspective. Could be interesting. It doesn't bother me. We talked about my favorite writers who are shockingly all white, but there's some of them are men, some of them are women. Good writing is good writing. I've said this from the beginning.
In the same vein, this is a real classic. Daniela Galarraza, writing in the Washington Post a couple of years ago with a diatribe against the word exotic. And she starts with the condemnation of a 1993 piece in her own newspaper that begins, one of the nicest things about Afghan restaurants is that they appeal to even the most timid of diners. Your visiting aunt from Spokane, Washington can enjoy the adventure of an exotic cuisine with the reassurance of familiar looking food. The Barnetts meant no harm, no foul when they put the word exotic in their review of Bethesda Sunrise Kebab, but their presumptive Anglo-centric perspective on a cuisine based in South Asia says more about how they saw the world than about the cuisine itself. And it goes on. And I mean, it goes on. It goes on at great lengths, denouncing the word exotic and exoticism and how racist it is. When you write, you're writing with an audience in mind. And the people who wrote that piece about Afghan restaurants were writing for an audience in the early 1990s in Washington, D.C., that were not familiar with Afghan food. They flatly, period, were not familiar with exotic food. And they weren't othering it. They were using the correct adjective. Am I wrong to call this facile?
No. Put yourself in that position. As you just pointed out, it was a different time, a different place. This is new. Now you wouldn't call Chinese food today or Thai food. Pad Thai is no longer exotic, right? But that's the term we use for something that's novel, that's new. It's new experience to us. And the idea that exotic also means bad, I think is ridiculous. I think exotic means good. Exotic means
too. It's so, and of course, their criticism is that it's subjective. Of course, it's subjective.
You can't be subjective anymore, though. You have to follow these rules. I mean, there are these rules are in place now. You cannot, opinions. Well, it depends on what your opinion is. The point is that this is good, this is bad, and we will tell you, and then we might change the rules later. But I just want to say, for the record, I think exotic has positive connotations to it. It's exciting, it's distant, it's adventurous. Exotic meal, exotic locations, exotic dancer.
There you go. There you go.
And by the way, I always say somebody is exotic looking as a compliment.
Oh, you're so racist. You're so racist, cool. Eliana. You're so racist. But the foods follow an arc. They start out and they're unknown, and then they become exotic, and then they become mainstream. If we think about the Canton Inn Chinese food that I was eating as a kid the Oriental Garden that we considered very exotic, right? In West Virginia in the early in the early 1980s, we thought we're drinking tea out of little tiny cups, and look at all of this stuff. And now the food that we ate there at that time would now hardly even be considered Chinese. It wouldn't be considered Chinese by Chinese people, and certainly wouldn't be considered, a lot of what we were eating would now just be considered normal American fare. Stuff moves.
That's right. And also, That is also a great piece that has been written about what happened to Chinese restaurants, Chinese American restaurants, mind you. If you go to China right now, you're not going to get what you're getting here, which is unfortunate. I like Chinese American food. Why don't we see that anymore? And a piece had been written about this, and I apologize, I don't know the author's name, but it has to do with assimilation because the Chinese restaurant workers and owners, you're there 7 days a week. You're there late hours and early, and it's nonstop in the kitchen, in the galley kitchen. It's very hard work. And they did this to put their kids through school. They go to college. The kid in college is not going to come back and continue the family tradition. They're doing something else. And that's just it's a part of the American experience. But that is a reason. That's an interesting story. And it is sad because I miss good, normal Chinese food.
Yes. What's the best Chinese restaurant in Washington, D.C.? I selfishly ask for myself.
I think Eliana might agree with me on this one here. I think at the moment it's going to be Chang Chang on 19th
It is
Street,
good.
South of DuPont. This is from Peter Chang's famous restaurant chain. He has different locations, and I think some of the locations, honestly, are hit or miss. There's one in McLean that I haven't heard good things about, and the one in...
I like it.
You do? Okay.
I do. It's not as good as Chang Chang. Chang Chang is a little bit higher end, I would say. I've heard about Peter Chang that you have to go eat in the restaurant because they have the big puffy pancake thing.
Yes, they can't do that at home.
Travel, and then the soup dumplings don't really travel.
Right.
So that is what I've heard. But I agree. And then there's one out in Fairfax, right?
Oh yeah. There's
Mama Chang.
There's Mama Chang as well.
Yeah.
In terms of a Peking duck, Chris, there's Peking Gourmet Inn, which is in Falls Church. I recommend going there during the day when it's more safe. But they have, that was a popular hangout with the DARPA folks in the olden days. George H.W. would go there, and that is an excellent place for Peking duck. And then the place, but I'm talking about like even
I like
normal.
the Peter Chang actually in McLean. Their duck is very good.
That's good to know. And also, I would say, but if you're looking for like General Tso's sesame chicken and sweet and sour, which is just give me the normal basic stuff from Chinese American food, the only place that I know of that still does that in a traditional way is the T Noodles Rice Cafe, TNR Cafe.
Oh, really?
Yes, it is not the New Republic Cafe. I'm just going to let you know.
It's a different.
Vic, what do you think about the place that's by the motel right by the highway in DC? It's like in a motel.
Oh, out by the Arboretum.
You mean like heading out to the
yes.
Baltimore Washington Parkway?
And it's super authentic.
Really? I've heard people say it's good.
I have never been.
Yes, they do a cumin lamb that is interesting.
Okay.
And a lamb sandwich type thing that's
But wait a minute.
It's a little too authentic for me.
This is supposed to be a Chinese restaurant?
Yes, let me pull the name.
Okay, I do not do Chinese lamb for some reason.
Yeah,
I can say that.
I agree.
I
agree. I don't.
Something about it. I get a little skittish.
I like lamb straightforward. Lamb is definitely something I don't want any hiding around.
Right. Right. That was the whole point of sauces, right? It was to hide. The French made great sauces to hide bad meat.
Also, in Lockville, Bob's Shanghai is really good.
Well, it might as well.
Okay, wait. I gotta find the place of this one that's in DC. You guys.
Yeah, I would take lamb. Go to a Middle Eastern
be
restaurant. Get the lamb.
Agree.
Yes.
Agree.
That's
Panda Gourmet.
Oh,
Panda Gourmet.
Well, unless they're serving panda, I don't know.
And it's inside the Days Inn off of New York Avenue.
In a very sketchy neighborhood.
Yeah.
A very sketchy neighborhood.
Okay. And I'm reading on Eater, it says the Dan Dan noodles and Mapo tofu are sure bets. And you can order online for takeout.
Okay. For our obsession this week, I am going to ask that we delve into one of the most controversial topics that we have ever visited on this podcast in our years doing this podcast. And these are the strong opinions that people have about fast food restaurants. And I'm, for example, much less pro Burger King than Eliana. We both share an admiration for McDonald's, but Fodors Travel ranked, and the whole point of food journalism is to publish rankings that people can argue about. It's the kind of content that the internet loves. But they ranked the fast food restaurants in America. They picked Culver's number 1, Shake Shack number 2, In-N-Out 3, Whataburger 4, Raising Cane's 5, Five Guys 6th, Chick-fil-A 7th, Dave's Hot Chicken 8th, Kelly's Roast Beef, great call, 9th, White Castle 10, Dick's and Zips, not familiar with, 11 of 12, and fittingly, Jollibee, 12 of 12.
Wait a minute. Are you telling me Arby's is not on the list?
Arby's is not on the list, and I can make a strong case for Arby's. I can't make a stronger case for Arby's than I can for others of these. I'm particularly impressed by the inclusion of Kelly's Roast Beef, which it's amazing to me that it exists. It's a Massachusetts based roast beef sandwich restaurant and is truly fabulous. And it is better than Arby's. But what is Vic's? Give us your, in no particular order, what are your top 5 fast food chains?
I'm really impressed that they mentioned Culver's at the top.
It is so good.
It is amazing.
Yes, I might have to have it there. But I was there in Middleton, Wisconsin, when I was reporting for my vodka book, which, by the way, for your listeners, you can still get on Amazon.
What's its name? What's the name of the book?
It's Vodka: How a Colorless, Odorless, Flavorless Spirit Conquered America. Available on Amazon by yours truly. And I had to go to the Culver's because everybody was talking about it. And it's the butter burger.
It's very good.
And a concrete. You can get
The
cheese curd and fries. If they opened up a Culver's in Georgetown, do you know how long that line would go? All the way down M Street up to the bridge. That's where it would go.
It's very good.
So DC, the funny thing for us, of course, and you know this, we've been here long enough. The only thing that the DC people are obsessed about is authenticity. I want to find the most authentic cheesesteak and pizza, you name it, restaurant, because a lot of the city is not authentic, with the exception of, where you can get the half smokes and what is the name of that place that you can get the
Ben's Chili Bowl.
Ben's Chili Bowl, right? That's a very DC thing, but everything else is like, please bring it here. So I like Culver's. I like the Shake Shack burger, but the woke stuff makes me crazy. It's always in your face, it's just too much woke stuff, for all these various promotions.
Woke stuff. I don't go.
It's just like rainbow shakes, Eliana.
Okay,
just a lot. It's just too much. Which is no offense, but I don't need this constantly, please. So that's the second thing. But they have really good. And it's Danny Meyer, who of course is Gramercy Tavern.
Oh,
brilliant. Of course he
forgot.
would do this. Yes, of course. Five Guys. That is a lot. I went to a Five Guys in 1995 when there were only 2 locations, and it was in Arlington. And my only concern is if you go to one, you can go to one in Paris now, apparently. And I don't know if it's the same, but I like that. I talk
Their
about
fries absolutely stink.
Oh,
the Five Guys fries.
I am so
You have to
overwhelmed
eat them quick, but plentiful.
Yeah.
Never, or you need a
I
small
like a
container
greasy
to fill
fry.
the whole bag.
Not like them.
It
at
is a
all.
greasy
love a
fry.
greasy
It is
fry.
a greasy fry.
And they serve them in a bag.
Yes, you got to rip open the bag. You got to
They're
rip open the bag.
crispy. I just don't like
okay.
them.
In and Out. Tell us.
I've only been there once. I didn't order. What do they call it? Animal style.
style.
Yeah, I'd like to go back. I would have to skip 2 meals, Chris, if I was going to do
You got
that.
to do it
and
right.
That would be
yes.
it. Do it right. I've had it once. I thought it was fine. Service was good. Obviously, Chick-fil-A has the best service of any place that I think of in terms of fast food. But also on that list you mentioned was Whataburger. And Whataburger the service is excellent. The burger is fine. And I say fine
Overrated.
because sometimes I like, okay, well, this is interesting because I like a little element of sloppiness to the burger, not where the bun disintegrates, but where, there's a little bit hanging out. It's a very neat burger. At least my experience.
It's a neat
of it.
burger, and it lacks. I mean,
Too neat. It's
too neat. And so, for example, among ubiquitous burger chains, I love a Wendy's double.
Yes, Wendy's has a great burger.
And it should drip down your arm. It should be greasy,
yes.
juicy, saucy. It should deliver on those
Right.
things. Whataburger feels sterile.
It did. Yeah. Okay. I'm glad I wasn't the only one.
No, I think I think Texans love Texas things, and therefore they're aggressive about it. One of the chains that's missing from this list, and this list is obviously canted away from what's popular, right? So they're not going to talk about McDonald's. They're not going to talk about Wendy's, Burger
Too
King,
obvious.
blah, 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 blah. But Del Taco. Have you ever eaten in a Del Taco?
No.
I have not.
I cannot say enough good about Del Taco, which is it's a quantum leap beyond Taco Bell. And surprisingly, the best thing at Del Taco are the French fries. I don't know that there is a better French fry in the fast food game than Del Taco, which is really weird that you go into a place and you order a quesadilla and they ask you if you want fries with it.
Yeah, that is.
But it's a crinkle cut fry, which I'm not usually a crinkle cut person.
Oh, I like them.
It's a crinkle cut fry. It's great. It's fabulous. I think Raising Cane's is overrated. I'm there. I said it. I know it's another regional enthusiasm.
I've never been.
I've never had it. If they were here, I would try it out. I like Popeye's fried chicken, but my Getting Hammered co-host, Mary Catherine, she says it's terrible. She prefers Bojangles.
Well, that's her. She's got some regional bias that's at work
Yes.
there. And Bojangles is the best. It's a very narrow category. Best breakfast chicken. Their breakfast, their breakfast sandwich, the Bohangla's breakfast sandwich is very, very good. And my last fiercely held opinion on fried chicken chains. Popeyes is very good fried chicken, but must be eaten hot. You have to eat Popeyes right now because there's too much breading and it's going to sog out. KFC, back to where we began, Vic.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Kentucky Fried Chicken, KFC, Kentucky Fun Chicken is the best picnic chicken and the best chicken to, if you're going to take fishing, take on a trip. And I love cold fried chicken and KFC original recipe. That's the one. That's the one.
I have to tell you though, if you go back in time to the 1970s, that Kentucky Fried Chicken was excellent. And somewhere in the late 80s or the early 90s, they changed that recipe to make it healthier for us. I don't want healthier for us. When I'm walking in, I know what I'm getting into. It's like McDonald's used to, deep fry, cook their fries in beef tallow. And now it's the vegetable oil. But the beef, I gave it a beefiness to it. And that's why I loved old Kentucky Fried Chicken, not new. Extra crispy.
All right, stipulated. Any other revisions or extensions that you'd like to offer on fast food?
I'm good. I'm good to go. I'm starving.
We're recording this right before lunch.
And I'll see you for lunch.
That's right.
Yeah, we're going to order a lot
20
now.
minutes.
Thank you guys for having me.
Thank you so much for doing it. Always a pleasure. Always a pleasure.
Thank you, Vic. Truly. And that is all the time we have left for the food about the news about the food. If you have a story you want us to talk about, email us at wretches@nebulouspodcasts.com and sign up for our newsletter at nebulouspodcasts.com. This has been Ink Stained Wretches from Nebulous Media, produced by Colin Chicola. Find us on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. Just search for Wretches.